Hi, my name is Cory, and I'm a CG specialist here at Chaos Group. Today, I'm very excited to introduce to you our latest renderer, V-Ray 5 for 3ds Max. In this webinar, we'll cover brand new features and powerful new workflows that enable you to do more than just rendering. Instead, making it easier than ever to get creative and explore different moods and styles with your images. First, we'll go over a few UI updates and then introduce you to the newly redesigned V-Ray frame buffer, where you can manage your renders as well as do extensive post-processing. We'll then take a look at the new improved sky in V-Ray 5 that gives you incredibly striking sunsets and sunrises with even more dynamic results. And we'll explore the brand new material library, which gives you a plethora of high-quality and ready-to-use materials, as well as new built-in presets that save you time and enable you to shade your scenes faster. We'll also cover new randomization options, which help you add variety to your textures and to create more realistic looking results. Lastly, we'll get creative exploring the incredible versatility of the new V-Ray Light Mixer, as well as discover the powerful compositing capabilities available to you right out of the box in V-Ray 5. Okay, I've opened up a scene here in 3ds Max that I'll be using throughout this webinar. To get started, let's take a quick look at the newly simplified interface in the V-Ray settings. The new features we'll cover today also work with V-Ray 5 for CPU and V-Ray GPU, so you can use these features with whichever render engine that best suits your needs. V-Ray 5 is also generally already set up to render great-looking results using just the default settings for most scenes, without any need for tweaks. That said, we've made a few small UI changes to streamline some options, should you decide to adjust any settings. In the V-Ray tab, you'll find that the global DMC settings have now been simplified down to 2 checkboxes. These options determine the sampling method for evaluating blurry values, such as from anti-aliasing, depth of field, motion blur, and so forth. By default, we have also enabled a brand new sampling method here called blue noise sampling. Blue noise sampling automatically produces a more pleasant result for renders that have low sample counts, or in situations where you're using depth of field or motion blur. It is generally most noticeable when rendering lower quality images with fewer samples. Next, in the GI tab, we have also streamlined the light cache settings in V-Ray 5. Again, the light cache has already been set up with default values that should serve you well for most purposes. Just like in V-Ray Next, you can also simply switch the preset mode from still to animation in order to use the default settings we have found work well for animation renders. Okay, now let's go ahead and open up the brand new V-Ray 5 frame buffer. The new VFB has been redesigned from the ground up with a brand new UI, powerful new functionality, and an overall emphasis on speed so that you can work faster than ever. The new VFB is now much more than just a render image window, but it comes built in with powerful post-processing tools that let you further modify your images, all with V-Ray 5. We will explore these new post-processing tools in much more depth later, but for a quick overview of the V-Ray 5 VFB, let's start with these icons along the top right here. Here we have our main render controls, such as render, interactive rendering, and the abort button. We also have the debug shading dropdown for accessing different shading modes, such as isolating selected objects. To the left, we have the render region toggle, test resolution options, and the follow mouse mode, which prioritizes render buckets based on proximity to the mouse pointer. Lastly, we have the save image and clear channel buttons. On the left-hand side, we've got our render elements dropdown, which lists any elements rendered with the image. Let's load in an image to demonstrate. I'll click on File, Load Image, and let's import an image file I saved in advance from the scene we're working with. Now you'll see that the Render Elements dropdown has populated with the elements that were rendered with this image. You'll also find a button to the right that can toggle between the RGB and alpha channels. Now, if we double-click down here on this handle, the History panel opens up. Here we can store a history of rendered images with their post-production corrections, as well as do A/B comparisons between images. There's also a search bar that lets you filter the image history based on scene paths, as well as do searches through any notes that you've added to the images. If you'd like to add a note, right-click on any image, and in the menu, click on Edit Note. You can also now load in post-processing layers from a saved image, which are something we'll cover later on, as well as choose from familiar past options regarding V-Ray settings, or the option to open the scene an image is from. Down at the base of the VFB, we also have a toolbar that contains information about the image pixel values and coordinates based on where your mouse hovers. The toggle on the bottom left lets us lock our coordinates when we click somewhere over the image. In addition, we can toggle between raw and RGB corrected pixel values. We can also specify RGB values under the current mouse position, selecting between HSV, web, and 8-bit modes. Finally, in the far right corner, we can open up the V-Ray message log for more detailed information about a render. Double-clicking the handle on the right here exposes the brand new Layers panel in V-Ray 5. Here we have a new suite of color corrections and tools for adjusting your image. With this powerful new functionality, you can manage all of your post effects in a layer tree-based editor. For example, to add lens effects, access denoiser settings, or adjust the white balance. If we select the lens effects, you'll see below in the Properties section that if we enable bloom and glare, we can tweak the lens effects controls for our rendered image. If I select the Source RGB option, you'll see here that we can access the light mix and the composite modes as well, which we'll explore together in detail later on. Right-clicking on any layers also opens up a context menu with additional options. There's also a visibility icon in the shape of an eye next to each layer, which allows us to hide or unhide it, effectively turning it off and on. Up above, you'll find icons to create or delete new layers, as well as the option to save a layer tree preset or load in a preset. There's also a quick access icon, allowing you to quickly navigate between different saved layer tree presets. Note that you'll need to specify the path for these presets in the VFB settings, which we'll explore in a moment. Lastly, you'll find Undo and Redo buttons here to the right. Finally, the Stats tab here allows you to review useful information about your scene. The Stats tab changes depending on the scene and rendering mode, but it generally offers performance and memory tracking data. Back over on the left here, we have a few drop-down menus for accessing familiar V-Ray options, as well as a View menu, which gives you options for changing the display color space, zoom amount, channels, color clamping, and so forth. Let's also take a quick look at the VFB settings in the Options menu. Here, you'll have controls for the render view and render region, setting your VFB history folder path and other history options, and a tab for specifying your layer preset's path location. There's also a toggle to show advanced settings for all the tabs, offering further options for customization. Lastly, if you've made any changes to your VFB settings, don't forget to click the Save and Close button at the very bottom of the window to save your changes. Alright, now that we've seen an overview of the new V-Ray 5 VFB, let's move on to take a look at our scene here and get rendering. Okay, let's begin by exploring the brand new improved sky model, which is an analytical sky model that gives you stunning looking sunrises and sunsets, and can be especially useful in cases where you do not want the sun to be positioned completely above the horizon. For a brief comparison, I'd first like to show you how the HOSEC sky model looks in our scene, which was available in previous versions of V-Ray. Normally, you would draw out a V-Ray sun in the viewport to get started, but to move things along, I'm just going to unhide a V-Ray sun that I've drawn out in advance and align it to one of a few anchor points I set up that serve as decent positions for the sun in the scene. Now, let's double check our sky model is set to the default HOSEC, and then let's head back over into the VFB and start the IPR. Alright, You can see here we have a decent looking sunset with some bright yellow light coming in through the window. Now, let's save this image in the History panel for comparison later by pressing the green plus icon. Okay, let's now switch the sky model from HOSEC to the new improved model available in V-Ray 5. And right away, you can see that the new improved sky has added some more character to our scene here. Let's also save this render to the history and then do a quick A-B comparison with the HOSEC model, selecting the A-B icon and then choosing the two most recent saved renders. The new improved sky has a noticeably richer and more contrasty tone, offering a mix of both orange and yellow shades of color. Alright, back over in the 3ds Max viewport, let's reposition the sun by aligning it to another anchor point I've set up. And right away in the IPR, you'll see that we get a nice shift in the color hue of the sun itself as it gets lower towards the horizon, becoming a darker shade of orange. If we increase the size multiplier for the sun to something like 5, you'll see how the sun not only becomes larger, but the actual color of the sun itself has changed again to a deeper reddish orange color. I'm also going to open up the lens effects properties, and let's increase the intensity and opacity a bit to see how that adds a little more softness and bloom to the sun's edges. Now you can see how using the new improved sky model, you can easily get much more dynamic lighting scenarios to play with, simply by changing the sun's position or size in the scene. This makes it easy to quickly explore and experiment with a variety of sunset lighting conditions to find something that works well for your scene. Let's move on now to take a look at the brand new material library in V-Ray 5. You can see that I've gone ahead and made a few adjustments to our scene's lighting setup here, and blocked out the window by adding a new material to it, so that we're using only artificial lighting from here on. I've also temporarily switched cameras here, just for a moment, so I can show you the full room with the new lighting setup. Okay, let's explore the brand new material library by clicking on this icon here to open up the asset browser. V-Ray 5 now comes with more than 500 ready-made materials, and as you can see on the left-hand side, the material library gives us a bunch of different categories to choose from. For example, materials range from bricks, stone, and tiles to furniture styling categories such as leather, fabric, and foam, to a variety of more eclectic categories such as emissive and diagrammatic materials. And if you're not sure where to look, you can also use the search function to locate materials. Altogether, the material library is a great time saver, with the new asset browser making it possible to save, find, apply, and organize your materials. You can further customize the materials to your liking as well, allowing you to take a material as a starting point and then tweak it to your satisfaction from there. Then, custom materials can be saved as .mat files and then added to the asset browser. We'll provide a link in the description of the video, which will let you access a new tool that is in beta, which automatically creates thumbnails and does everything needed to add your custom materials to the library. Alright, let's see about applying some materials in our scene, starting with the couch and chair here. Back in the asset browser, let's navigate to the leather materials and choose a black leather material like this one. If we want to inspect it a bit more closely, we can right-click on it and choose Preview to inspect a larger preview of it, and also get information about the submaps used. Note that we can also right-click and add this material and others to our favorites, which can then be accessed from the right-hand flyout panel for future use. Okay, let's go ahead and start the IPR so that we are switched back to our close-up camera here. Now, let's right-click on the leather material and choose Apply to Selected Objects. Now we can see in the IPR that we've got the leather material applied to our couch and chair. Keep in mind that you can also apply materials with real-world scale enabled and even triplanar mapping, which can be useful for objects that don't have suitable UV coordinates, since it projects textures based on the surface normals of the shaded object. Great. Now let's apply another material to this group of geometry, including the table here. I'd like to use something metallic this time. You'll see that we've got a variety of metals to choose from, including ones that have patterns, paint, galvanization, or weathering, and so forth. In this case, I'm going to use the titanium metal material by simply right-clicking on it to apply it. Now, let's find the base floor beneath the furniture here in the viewport. And then in the asset browser, go to the concrete section to find a material for it. You'll see that we have a variety of concrete materials to choose from. I'm going to select this concrete flooring I01 2-meter material here and go ahead and apply it to the scene. You can see how the new material library can really speed up your shading workflow to get some great looking materials into your scenes quickly. However, you're not limited to just using the materials right out of the box, but you can also further customize them. In fact, you can use our new randomization options to add variety by randomizing textures and colors, which can help your materials fit in more naturally and realistically with your environment. To show you an example, let's select the walls and floor group here in the background and explore how we can further improve their shading. We'll use a material from the library with the new randomization options available in the V-Ray multi-subtext. In the asset browser, let's head to the stone section of the material library. I'm going to select the stone granite A80cm material, and this time I'm also going to enable the Open Material Editor on Apply toggle at the top. Now, when I apply the material, the Slate Material Node Editor will open up with the shader and textures for the granite material. I'll rename the V-Ray material for the shader, and then let's see how this looks in the IPR. Alright, that's a good starting point, so let's save it to our VFB history on the left here, so we can compare it with the randomization adjustments we make next. Alright, back over here in the material editor, let's introduce some randomization using the V-Ray multi-subtext, which you can add from the V-Ray map section of the editor. For this scene, I've already prepared a multi-subtext in advance and hooked up a duplicate copy of the Granite Diffuse bitmap to the 15 ID inputs on the multi-subtext. In V-Ray 5, you can now assign random colors based on face material IDs, object IDs, and the element IDs of an object. I have the getID mode set to random by element because my wall and floor tiles have 15 different element IDs that I randomly distributed in advance. There are also 3 new parameters you can tweak: random hue, random saturation, and random gamma. These 3 parameters control the post-process randomization of colors, with their inputs being a percentage of the hue, saturation, value, or gamma range. Together, these new randomization options are a useful way to add variety to a scene and make it more realistic. To demonstrate, let's go ahead and crank up the random hue to 50 so we can see how this works, and then plug the multi-subtext into our Granite Materials V-Ray material. You'll see that the random hue effect becomes quite pronounced, with different hues appearing all over our tiles. However, it's far too strong for my taste. Let's bring it back down to something low like 10, to avoid getting any tint that is too colorful and prominent. There we go, that's looking much better. Next, let's take a look at the random saturation. I'm going to increase it to something very high like 100, just so you can see its effect. Now, we can see that the colors are much more saturated and striking. Again, it's too overpowering like this though, so let's lower that down to something like 20. Alright, that's starting to look pretty interesting. Let's also try increasing the gamma to something pretty high like 50. You'll see that this is creating a lot more contrast for some of our tiles, making many of them appear much darker. Let's bring the gamma back down to a value like 10. Alright, I'm liking how that looks. Let's now save this to our VFB history, and then do an A-B comparison with how the stone tiles looked before and after we added randomization. Note that if you want to compare the result with denoising, you can switch to the effects result channel. You'll see that the version on the left with randomization is looking more contrasty and striking, due to the additional variation, which makes the stone material feel richer and less dull. Now you've seen how with the multi-subtext, you can hook up a texture, adjust a few simple randomization parameters, and quickly introduce some more diversification to your textures. Alright, now let's move on to look at another new method for adding randomization to our scene, using the new V-Ray UVW randomizer texture. First, I'm going to switch cameras here, using the shortcut C to get a better angle of our concrete floor beneath the furniture, so we could take a closer look at the concrete texture. Back in the material editor, let's get the concrete floor material that we assigned earlier to view its node setup. I'll also rename it. You'll see that the concrete material does not have a V-Ray UVW randomizer texture as part of its node setup, although some materials from the library do. Let's right-click and add one from the V-Ray Maps menu. The V-Ray UVW randomizer can be used as a mapping source for a V-Ray bitmap or V-Ray triplanar text node. It offers convenient parameters to control multiple V-Ray bitmaps and speed up your workflow, making it a powerful tool to add randomization and realism to your textures. Before we hook it up though, let's start the IPR and see how our concrete floor looks at the moment. As you can see, the concrete floor has a pretty repetitive and noticeable pattern to it. Let's save this render to our history so we can do a comparison later, and then see how we can use the UVW randomizer to randomize this pattern and create something more subtle and interesting. In the parameters, we'll first need to select a randomization mode. I'm going to enable the brand new stochastic tiling method checkbox, which changes the mapping based on the UV tile. Now, we just need to plug the UVW randomizer into the mapping source inputs for all the respective bitmaps. And as you can see, the results are immediately looking pretty interesting, simply by enabling the stochastic checkbox. I'm also going to increase the tile blend parameter to 0.4 in order to adjust the edge blending between adjacent tiles. Now, you can see in the IPR that the patterns are looking much more subtle and blended together. We can also further tweak the variance settings below to create even more randomization. The variance section lets us control the min and max range in which the scale, offset, and rotation parameters are applied. Let's change the variance's U scale percent so that it scales on the U axis from 100 to 150 in order to further diminish the visible patterns in the texture. There we go. That's looking much more natural and authentic. As a final step, let's save the render to our history and then do an A-B comparison with our previous image to see how the randomization improves our result. As you can see, the previous image on the right clearly has a visible repetitive pattern, whereas the randomized image on the left is smoother and nicely blended, making the concrete altogether much more convincing. Now that we've explored a few new methods for adding randomization to your textures, let's take a closer look at some other new material features that we've introduced with V-Ray 5. Back in the material editor, let's create a new V-Ray material and take a closer look at the brand new material swatches. When you're making a material, you want to know exactly how it will look. As a result, we've updated the swatches so that you get a better lighting preview, enabling you to visualize how your material will look when you press render. I'm going to rename this material and just make some parameter changes here so you can see how the swatch updates. Now, you'll see that you get a more accurate render preview of the material when adjusting parameters, such as increasing the reflection or tweaking the reflection glossiness, and so forth. And if you enable the Show Background in Preview option, you'll find it easier than ever to understand your material's reflectivity, helping you to visualize how your material will look when rendered. Altogether, the new swatches give you an accurate sense of your materials as you work on them, so that you can be confident in the results you'll get when you press render later. Speaking of material improvements, let's create another V-Ray material and see how we can use the brand new built-in presets to create a chrome material. This preset dropdown gives you quick and easy access to some common materials, such as various metals, glass, plastic, water, and so forth. Now, you won't need to look up material information or IOR values for these common materials, saving you time while giving you realistic results. In this case, let's select the Chrome preset so we can apply it to the geometry in the scene here. Let's also switch cameras so we can get up closer to the Newton's cradle device and furniture in our scene. I'll select the group here, which contains the Newton's cradle, as well as the base of the chair, footrest, and couch, and then apply the V-Ray material with the Chrome preset to see how that looks. Alright, now let's go ahead and start the IPR, so we can see how the new Chrome material will look in our scene. Okay, great. That looks nice and with no need for any further tweaks. Now let's create a new V-Ray material and name it Water Material. Then, I'm going to select the Water Material preset. Now, let's also switch back to our main camera again, so we can apply it in our scene and start the IPR. I have already set up some geometry to apply the water on in advance, so I'm first going to unhide it. Now, let's assign our water material preset to it. Okay, now let's start the IPR to see how it looks. Alright, great. Now you can see that we've got a nice looking water body covering the floor's stone tiles. However, since I want the water to look even more like a surface rather than like water in a glass, I'm going to add a noise texture to it to give our water some more variation. Let's load in a simple 3ds Max noise texture and plug that into the bump map slot on our water material. Then see how it looks. Okay, this is a good start, but let's try lowering the noise size down to 20. There we go. That's looking more appropriate, but I still think the noise is too strong. Let's head back to our water material preset and bring the bump amount down to 0.5. Now, that's helping to break up the reflections without overdoing it, and giving us the subtle appearance of a surface. Starting with a basic material preset, you can see how further fine-tuning things with textures or tweaking parameters can get you customized results quickly to best suit your scene. Now, let's move on to apply a few presets to the flying car in the background, exploring even more ways to achieve customized results. First, I'm going to turn on this garage light in the background here, so we can better see the car and any changes we make to its materials. Okay, let's select the car body and create another V-Ray material. This time, I'm going to select the plastic material preset. By default, it has a yellow diffuse color, so let's change that to be nearly white. Now let's apply that to the car body in the scene. Perfect. Next, let's apply a material to the wings on the car body. I'm going to create another V-Ray material, which I'll name Base Black Material, and then let's choose the Plastic preset once again. First, I'm going to change the diffuse to a nearly pitch black color, and lower the glossiness down to 0.65. Now let's go ahead and apply this material to the car wings. Okay, I like the way this material looks so far, but I want the windows here to look less like plastic and more like tinted windows. For this, we can use the brand new Coat Parameters rollout to create a tinted window appearance. First, let's select the car's glass elements. Then, let's also change cameras so that we can get a closer look at the windows of the vehicle. You can see here clearly that the material has too much of a matte appearance for a window, as the reflections are far too dull. To fix this, let's duplicate our material and rename it Glass Material. Then, let's head to the Coat Parameters rollout below. The new coat layer is easy to set up and faster to render than a blend material, with straightforward parameters that make it easy to get a nice looking result. For example, let's increase the coat amount to 1 and then apply this material to the windows. You'll see that the coat amount controls the blending weight of the coat layer, with 0 meaning no coat layer, while higher values blend the coat gradually. Since we set the coat to 1.0, we're getting nice sharp reflections now in our windows. Now let's tweak the coat IOR to affect the reflections a bit, and increase it to something like 2.2. This is helping to create a subtle increase in the intensity of the reflections here. Note that the coat glossiness controls the sharpness of reflections, meaning a value of 1 would give us perfect mirror-like reflections. Since the glossiness is already at 1, we can see the reflections quite clearly. Let's now give the coat a bit more of a colored tint, using the coat color swatch. There we go. That's looking like a nice tinted window, while also still keeping the coat color fairly subtle. Now that you've seen how we can tweak our material presets to add more interesting characteristics like a reflective coat layer, let's move on to explore another brand new rollout, the sheen parameters. Let's switch cameras to a shawl we have draped across a chair in our scene. What you'll see in the IPR here is currently set to a default V-Ray material. Let's take a look at how we can use the sheen parameter to make it appear more like fabric. Let's select the shawl and then create a new V-Ray material, which I'll name Cloth Material. Then, let's change the diffuse color to give it something fitting. In this case, I'll try a brown color. Then let's set the reflection to a light brown or beige. I'm also going to bring down the glossiness to 0.65. Now let's assign this material to the shawl and see how it looks in the IPR. Okay, we're off to a good start. Now, let's drop down the sheen parameters to see how we can make our material appear more like cloth. The sheen is designed to assist with the creation of cloth materials. You can think of it like a top reflective layer on the diffuse color that makes creating a fall-off effect for cloth easier than ever. Let's start by adjusting the color of the sheen to a light brown or tan color and see what effect that has on the shawl. Note that you can use the sheen parameters to create a variety of cloth-like material styles, such as satin or velvet. Okay, I'm liking how this looks, but the cloth still doesn't have a noticeable enough sheen effect, and I'd like to make it more prominent. To do that, we can adjust the sheen glossiness, which controls the sharpness of the reflections. Let's try lowering it down to 0.3. You'll find that higher values let more light reach the diffuse, therefore diminishing the sheen's visibility, whereas lower values reflect more light, making the sheen effect more pronounced. Alright, now you've seen how we can easily introduce the sheen effect to help give our material the soft reflective character of fabric. At this point, we've now finished shading everything in our scene, so let's get ready to do a production render and explore some of the powerful new post-processing capabilities that come with V-Ray 5. First, I'm going to switch cameras to our final camera for rendering. You'll see here in the IPR that this perspective gives us a nice wide composition for our scene here. Okay, let's stop the IPR and then add a few render elements for our production render. Let's switch the denoiser engine from the NVIDIA AI denoiser to the default V-Ray denoiser, since it's more consistent for production rendering. With V-Ray 5, we want to make it so that you can easily create a production-ready image from start to finish, simply using V-Ray. As a result, we have introduced a new render element called V-Ray Back to Beauty, which automatically creates the necessary render elements you need to reconstruct the beauty paths in post-production. You can think of the V-Ray Back to Beauty element as a shortcut to save you time. It also ensures you don't forget to add critical elements that you might need later on to reconstruct the beauty paths in compositing. Since I'm using the denoiser, I'm also going to check on the denoise checkbox for the Back to Beauty element. So that way, the denoising operator is applied to all of the Back to Beauty render elements consistently. Now, let's also add the brand new V-Ray Light Mix, which is a new render element that we'll need to add in order to take advantage of the powerful light mixing capabilities in V-Ray 5. When the V-Ray Light Mix render element is enabled, you can then render your scene and further tweak your lights in the new VFB, both during IPR and even after a production render is complete. This means that you can tweak the intensity and color of lights and light-emitting materials, as well as enable or disable lights altogether, without needing to re-render your final output. You can even work faster if you mix your lights while rendering interactively, since you don't have to navigate to individual light sources to tweak their parameters. If we scroll down in the light mix settings and take a look at the Group By dropdown, you'll see that we can specify how to group the lighting information in the light mixer. In this case, I've already organized these lights into separate layers to manage them more easily, so I'm going to set this to group my lights by layers. Now, the lighting information for each layer will be stored in a separate channel. Note that for whichever mode you choose, the light mix will also create self-illumination and environment render elements, which will store light-emitting materials and environment information respectively. Okay, great. Now that I've got my render elements set up, let's prepare our render settings. I'm going to switch to the bucket rendering mode for production and set my noise threshold to 0.008. Otherwise, I'll leave the rest of my settings at the defaults. Now that we've got everything set up, let's go ahead and press render. Alright, great. Now that our production render is finished, let's jump into the new light mixer and see how we can create a variety of different lighting scenarios without any need to re-render the image. To access the light mixer, open the right-hand Layers panel, and then simply select the source layer in the layer panel hierarchy. We're already on the light mix mode, but if it says source RGB or composite, you can easily switch to the light mix mode at the top of the properties section. You'll see in the light mix parameters below that we have a UI which lists all of the lights, grouped by the layers that I set up in the scene. There are also various options available, such as the ability to save and load light mix presets, send light mix modifications to the compositor, or even transfer our light mix tweaks back to the lights in the scene. Alright, let's explore how we can build a new lighting scenario here from the ground up, starting with toggling off the All checkbox at the top. You'll see that our render is now pitch black as no lights are enabled at the moment. Let's now enable some of the more subtle ambient lights in our scene, beginning with the self-illumination lights. Then, let's also enable the lights car for the car's headlights. I think these headlights could be a bit brighter, so let's increase their multiplier to 4. Keep in mind that a light's standard multiplier will have a default value of 1. Alright, so far so good. Next, I'm going to turn on Lights Floor Charge A, and let's increase the multiplier to 2. I'll also turn on the Lights Garage for the light that is above the car. One of the amazing things about the light mixer is that you can change the colors of your lights, enabling you to completely reimagine the mood of your scene. For example, let's change the Lights Garage color. You'll see as I drag around in the color picker that the VFB updates the results very fast, making it so that I can find a color to suit my image very quickly. I think I'll go with a light blue here. Note that generally, we recommend rendering your lights as a white neutral color if you plan on doing light mixing. That way, you can focus on tinting your lights completely in post-production, without any color interference from the light's existing color tone. Alright, let's move forward and turn on the lights columns to begin lighting up the room and the space around the car. I'm also going to increase their multiplier to 2 so that they provide some more warmth and contrast in the image. Great, now let's also turn on the lights fill to add a fill light to our scene. It's definitely way too subtle though at first, so I'm going to crank it up a lot. Let's try setting the multiplier to 10. There we go, now I'm liking how this looks. If you get to a stopping point where you're happy with your results, you can simply press the Save button above. This will save your settings as a light mix preset file, which you can then load in later. In this case, I'll save mine as Light Mix Preset 01. Okay, now that we've saved our first preset, let's continue tweaking our lights to get a different look. I'll start by enabling the lights pots. These are from the lights that are around the base of the trees in our scene. Next, let's turn on the lights floor platform. This gives our scene a very nice rim of light around the room at the base of the wall. That's looking good so far, so next, let's enable the lights ceiling so we can shine some light on the furniture in our scene. I think the ceiling lights are too dim though, so let's increase their multiplier to 3. Great! If you'd like, we can also solo a particular light by holding Alt and clicking on it. This will turn off all other lights except the one you clicked on. Then you can Alt-click on it again to return to your lighting setup as you had it. I'd also like to change the color of the ceiling light to something warmer. Let's try a slightly yellowish color. There we go. I think that's looking pretty good. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and press Save again, and save this as Lightmix Preset 02. Alright, now that we've saved 2 presets of our own, let's also try loading in some presets that I saved in advance. Pressing the load button here, let's load in this preset called Lightmix Preset 03. And there we go. You can see that it is loaded in just fine, and our Lightmix settings have updated to reflect the different colors and multiplier values for the lights, and we can even further tweak this if we wanted to. Let's go ahead and load in the Lightmix Preset 04 as well. You can see that this preset is quite moody, and showcases how we can also use light mixing to achieve some very drastic differences in mood and tone, all by simply playing with the colors and multiplier values. And if you'd like to quickly compare saved presets, you can simply click on the Recent Presets icon here and switch between the Lightmix preset files we've loaded in to preview them. Note that the Recent Presets path location checks in the latest loaded preset files folder. We can also simply press the up and down arrow keys to switch between the recent presets very rapidly for comparison. Now, you can see how using the light mixer, we can quickly create a bunch of different lighting moods using a single rendered image, as well as save and load presets, and without needing to re-render anything. This saves you time while allowing you to explore different creative looks, all within the new V-Ray 5 VFB. And that's not all. Once you've got your Lightmix settings set up to your satisfaction, you can then send them over to the brand new compositing layer editor, where you can take your post-processing even further to refine your image. You can also press the reset button here, which resets all Lightmix changes to default values. However, if you do decide to send any of your Lightmix changes to the compositor, you'll find that all of the tweaks you made in the Lightmixer will be described in the relevant render elements. Okay, let's move on from the Lightmixer and switch over to the composite mode. The brand new compositor in V-Ray 5 offers a layer tree system that makes it possible to do nuanced color corrections, set blending modes, and combine render elements all within the new VFB. You'll see that all of the Back to Beauty render elements were neatly organized into a folder for us here. Whenever you add the V-Ray Back to Beauty render element before starting your render, V-Ray automatically creates this folder containing the necessary render elements for reconstructing the beauty pass. You'll see that we can select a render element layer to reveal its properties below. We can also hold Shift and select multiple layers, and view their properties below together. If we press the visibility or eye icon to hide multiple layers, we can reveal them one by one to see how the layers stack on top of one another. As you can see, the layer system applies corrections from the bottom to the top, meaning layers on top of the stack are considered in the foreground, and the result of all layers below is considered the background. The only exception to this is nested layers, which are executed after their parent, which we'll cover in a moment. Also, note that the display correction layer at the very top specifies the display color space of the resulting image or composite in the frame buffer. Alright, let's take a look at the V-Ray lighting element here and explore its properties below. You'll see here that I can adjust the layer's multiplier value, control its opacity, and select from a wide variety of blending modes at our disposal. Alright, let's explore how we can do some further color corrections here to improve our image. With color corrections like exposure and white balance, you can choose to apply them to a single layer instead of the entire composite. To do this, simply select a layer and then create a new correction, or you can drag a correction layer onto another layer. Let's select the V-Ray reflection layer, and from the Create Layer dropdown, let's add a curves correction. You'll see that the curves layer has been applied to the V-Ray reflection element specifically, as indicated by the downward arrow icon that is pointing to its parent. Now, let's tweak the curves a bit to help boost the reflections in our image. If we double-click on the curve, we'll create a new Bezier point. We can drag on its handles to tweak it, or right-click on the handles to get a context menu, where you can choose from different interpolation modes, or edit the point values to input specific X and Y coordinates. If we right-click elsewhere in the curve editor, you can switch the graph's theme, save and load B-curve files or ACV curve files from Photoshop, or enable the snap to grid mode. We can also select between different RGB channels to tweak those colors specifically. For this image, I'd like to simply increase the strength of the reflections without altering their color, so I'll just click and drag this point to bring out the reflections a bit. Okay, great! Now that you've seen how we can do color corrections using curves, let's take a look at another powerful new correction tool, the filmic tone map. First, let's deselect any layers and then create a filmic tone map correction so that it is added to the top of our layer tree. The filmic tone map allows you to control different types of mapping curves as well as apply gamma correction and select a color space. Tone mapping is the process of rescaling the high dynamic range values in an image to within the visible interval. This is usually done in a non-linear fashion, for example with a custom curve, and the user has control over the parameters of the tone mapping operator. Note that all our filmic tone map operators act globally on the image and lack any local function. Let's take a look at how the different tone map types here impact the image by clicking on the dropdown. I'll first select the linear type. Now, we can use the up and down arrow keys to switch between the different types for a quick comparison. As you can see, each tone map type has a different effect on the overall light and dynamic range of the image. In this case, I'm going to leave it on the power curve option, and then let's make a few more tweaks below. The toe and shoulder controls here allow you to adjust the tone map's curve, which you'll see adjusts along with the image when I bring the toe length slider down. Let's also adjust the toe strength. And lastly, bump up the shoulder strength just a tiny bit. You can see below that the curve visualization is updated to reflect the changes we made to these parameters. There we go! Now you can see how these different tone map types can be used to give your image a much more contrasty and dynamic looking result. Once I've finished compositing, I can also save my layer tree setup as a preset by simply clicking the Save Layer Tree Preset button up top. I'll save this as Layers Preset 01. Note that layer tree presets are not scene unique, meaning if you save a layer tree preset with composite corrections, you can also use the preset with another image, so long as the image is rendered with the same render elements that are saved with the preset. You can also easily save universal presets that exclude any composite or light mix corrections if you only add and/or modify layers above the source layer. Just to show you what it would look like to load in different settings, let's click the Load Layer Tree Preset button to the right, and select Layer Preset 02, which is a preset that I set up in advance. Now you can see that the new layer tree has replaced the one that we had just set up. And the results are clearly visible, as our image has a noticeably warmer look and feel to it. Now, similar to the light mix presets, we can also use the quick axis icon to quickly switch between different presets for comparison. Note that the quick axis searches for presets at a path you specify in the VFB settings, under the Layers tab. When you're all done compositing and happy with your image, just don't forget to save your render out of the VFB by clicking on the Save icon. If you click and hold on the icon, you will get a drop-down with additional options that let you save all channels to separate files, or save all channels to a single file using the EXR or VR image formats. In this case, I'll save all channels to a single file as a VR image. Alright, now you've seen how easy it is to quickly customize and composite your renders using the new V-Ray frame buffer. With a powerful suite of color correction controls, blending modes, and the ability to tweak specific render elements to your liking, you can now go beyond rendering to get stunning looking production images, all within V-Ray 5. Now, I'd also like to mention a few more features available to you in V-Ray 5. We've added a brand new car paint material and FLAKES material, which have more precise flakes filtering and reduced memory usage to get you stunning and photorealistic looking images. In addition, we've also added material presets to the V-Ray Hair Next material. you'll find a wide selection of hairstylings out of the box, ranging from natural colors like sandy blonde or dark brown to dyed hairstyles like scarlet red or even white fur. Just like with the V-Ray material presets, once you select a hair preset, you can further customize and tweak its parameters to find a look that's most suitable for your image. We have added a new exposure value setting, which lets you input a straightforward exposure value to control image brightness. Using this mode will replace the ISO value, giving you a simple and straightforward way to tweak the exposure while still giving you control over the shutter speed and f-number values for motion blur and depth of field, respectively. We also now support an experimental out-of-core GPU render mode, specifically for CUDA graphics cards. When your GPU runs out of memory, or triangle mesh data is no longer needed, out-of-core takes this data out of the GPU memory and stores it in system RAM. This way, you have the option to render on GPU, even if your scene exceeds your GPU VRAM limit. Note that since this is currently an experimental feature, it is not yet supported for RTX cards. Light path expressions are a very powerful and advanced tool within the V-Ray Light Select render element, which allow you to extract specific lighting events from the scene to a separate channel. This gives you very fine control of the image in compositing. For example, to capture the global illumination that comes from the environment only. You can check out our documentation if you'd like to learn more about light path expressions and how to construct them. Altogether, these powerful new features give you an incredibly robust and versatile upgrade to your render toolkit, making V-Ray 5 an all-in-one solution to serve most of your needs. The new material library, asset browser, and presets help you to create high-quality materials quickly, while the randomization options save you time and help you to make your textures even more realistic. Together, the material library and randomization options serve as a powerful combination, giving you both a starting point for your materials while making it easy to quickly customize them further. In addition, the incredible versatility of the new built-in post-production tools, such as the Light Mixer and Compositor, take you beyond rendering and give you creative freedom to further polish your production-ready images, all within V-Ray 5. If you'd like to try out V-Ray 5 for 3ds Max, please visit our website, chaosgroup.com, for more information and to download a free trial. If you have any further questions, please feel free to check out our docs page for additional information about these new features as well. And for the latest updates, click subscribe on our YouTube channel, Chaos Group TV, for more videos about new products and releases. Thanks for joining me for this webinar session, and I hope to see you next time.